Hello, everyone. Today I'm here with Harvey Liu. He's the Experimentation Strategist at Amplitude. Thank you so much, Harvey, for accepting my invitation for this AMA session here with Grow Hackers Community. Today we're going to start with some introductory questions, and then I'm going to move to the questions sent by our community members. If anyone has any questions along the way, you can ask those here in the chat. Oh, that way. It's the other way around with the camera. So you can send those there, and we're going to try to get to them during this 1-hour webinar with Harvey Liu. So Harvey, let's get started with you introducing yourself a little bit and telling us a little bit more about your work and what you're currently doing in Amplitude.
Sure. Well, first off, thanks so much, Jordana, for the invite. And thank you so much to the Growth Hackers community for your attendance and also for all your thoughtful questions. I'm really excited to dive into these with you all and hopefully have a really lively discussion today. So as Jordana mentioned, my name is Harvey, and I am building out the experimentation strategy team at Amplitude, which is a product analytics company and is the leader in the digital optimization space. So my specific role is to build out the experimentation success program. And what that means is for those of our customers who have adopted the Amplitude experiment platform, my role is to provide resources and assets and programs for them to be able to successfully drive and build out a very effective A/B testing and experimentation program within their own organization. Previously, I've helped build out customer success teams and growth teams at LaunchDarkly, which is a feature management software, at mParticle, and Apptimize, which is a mobile A/B testing solution.
Wonderful. And can you tell us a little bit more about how this experimentation squad started in Amplitude and what are the goals and how is that has evolved over time?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And I'll preface this by saying I might not be the best person to give the whole timeline of the evolution of the team, since I joined Amplitude after much of this process was already built out and the team had already launched. But I'll give you my perspective on this, having been there for a few months now. So I'm not sure exactly what the timeline was when Amplitude as a business started looking into A/B testing, but as an analytics platform, I think both the engineering, product, and go-to-market leadership within Amplitude realized some time ago that our customers were really hungry to take the insights that they were generating from Amplitude Analytics and to leverage that a step further to drive product growth and optimization. So I think just through a lot of these conversations that we had with customers, we recognized that there was an opportunity to build out an A/B testing solution on top of the analytics platform. So I believe the initiative was initially spearheaded by Amplitude CTO, Curtis Liu. And now it is a pretty broad-ranging team that encapsulates leadership and input from all across the organization, from product to engineering, pre-sales, post-sales, design, and marketing. So it's a very broad pillar.
Harvey, how about testing within your platform? Have you guys always had a vein to testing within your own products, or is your team more focused in helping customers with their experimentation?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Amplitude being an analytics company, data and analytics is a very core part of how we build our product and our services. So we absolutely believe in dog fooding our own product. So generating insights, testing what works, is always very core to our business and how we operate. One of our core tenets as a company is humility and being humble. And what that means is constantly challenging our own assumptions, and finding data and insights to either validate or invalidate some of the previously held assumptions we had. So especially with a new product like Experiment, we're constantly looking into the data to better understand how our customers are using us, what is working for them, what isn't working for them, and how we can build or shift or pivot to make sure that our product is usable and adoptable.
All right. And how about the goals within the experimentation team, especially within testing your own platform? How do you guys assign it, and who owns these goals? How do you organize squads and distribute these objectives?
Yeah, that's also a great question, and I'll say so. Our experiment product itself has been out in the market for less than a year, so there's been a lot that's in flux and a lot that has changed. And for those in the group who have either worked at more fledgling or nascent startups or have built new products, you know how quickly you have to iterate and how quickly you have to be able to shift and pivot. So our goals are quite varied. Certainly at the beginning, customer adoption and acquisition and growth was a big focus of ours. And it still is. It certainly still is as we continue to get more traction in the market and have a better understanding of our user profiles and product market fit. But now that we are about a year into the marketplace, our goals have certainly evolved into more customer focused initiatives, such as customer activation, customer engagement, and certainly customer growth. And both of these from a commercial and revenue perspective, but more so our focus now more on the customer experience and usability. We want to make sure that our customers are actually getting value from our product, and we as a business and as product owners understand what that value is.
Wonderful. So now that we understand a little bit more about the context here, I'm going to move to the questions that were sent by our audience. The first one is quite a broad one, let's say. So it's from John Peters. And so that we get off to a proper start with this new startup, please describe the basic tenets and pillars of best practices in establishing an A/B testing component in our business. So it's a broader question, as in the basics, and how do you get even started with a process like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of different approaches that I've seen companies take when it comes to building out a foundational practice for A/B testing. But I think the most effective way to really get started and make sure that you hit the ground running is to really understand what you're testing and why. And there's several different approaches to this, right? So in an ideal world, you might have some sort of analytics tool in place, such as Amplitude, where you have a solid amount of insight into how your users are interacting with your product, or what aspects of your product maybe need the most work or need the most iteration. But also, more importantly, is tying those sort of technical or product initiatives back to the business. So what's most important to your business right now? Are you looking more at user acquisition? Are you looking more at user activation? Are you looking more at user engagement, retention, and growth? So as a leader within an organization, determining those metrics and then being able to tie that down to individual product metrics, and then more importantly, communicating that message out to the broader organization. I think longer term, what I've seen is one of the more successful components of experimentation is getting buy-in across multiple parts of the organization, but ideally every part of the organization. So to the extent that you as a leader can reduce siloing and sort of evangelize the practice and evangelize the necessity of experimentation, and explaining how the practice of experimentation contributes to and supports the initiatives of everybody within your organization, I would say that's probably one of the foundational core aspects of building a successful experimentation and A/B testing culture within your business. But yeah, all to say, data is key. I think the other part of this too is you don't necessarily need to have the most robust data set build out. You don't need to be able to have insight into everything. The other part of it is get started. Like I mentioned, one of our core tenets at Amplitude is be humble. Go into it knowing that you're not going to know everything. You're not going to get all the data you need at once. You're going to be proven wrong. You're going to have a lot of your inherent assumptions about your business or your product might not be correct, and you're going to have to be okay and comfortable with a lot of the testing and a lot of the analytics maybe exposing some of that. So again, as a leader, building and encouraging a culture where that is not only okay but encouraged will go a long way to really scaling out a very effective experimentation machine, but also building a culture of experimentation within your business.
That's what it's all about. One of the main issues that we see is, for example, when a hero leaves and then this culture of experimentation is broken, or there are issues, for example, when a team is starting experimenting and they find out that test results are not compatible with their preferences or their past experiences, and it's just a challenge to slowly turn that around, right?
Exactly.
So next question is common A/B testing pitfalls and mistakes.
So that's a segue, and exactly to what you just mentioned, Jordana. This is something that I see a lot with customers too. Is even as teams begin A/B testing, I think it's very hard to relinquish some of those that dependency on instinct. So I hear a lot from customers, oh, well, this experiment failed because it didn't prove the hypothesis that we were trying to support or prove. Which I think there might be some later questions about the definition of success or failure of an experiment, but that exactly there, right? Holding on a little bit too much or relying too much on your instinct as opposed to completely relinquishing your ego over to data and letting the data and the results tell you really the insights that you as a business and as a leader probably should be learning. So yeah, big takeaway here is relinquish your ego, follow the data. Numbers don't lie, but as long as you know how to look at the numbers and dive into it. So I think that's the secondary element of it is not another mistake that we constantly see is not questioning things enough. So even if you do have a result that maybe supports your hypothesis, ask yourself if you really know why. Are you able to really parse into the data at a secondary or tertiary layer and really understand the why behind the if and the then? So really try to understand what is impacting your user behavior, what's really driving certain lifts, and be a little bit more curious and rigorous in testing out hypotheses, but also the results of your hypotheses. And
there's a real issue often with causality, right? You can't really isolate on whether or not that change came because there was this public holiday or it was because of the changes that you've made. So it's quite hard to isolate the factors.
Exactly. Causality and correlation are often very different, and then there's so many other factors that you want to isolate, especially with a lot of retail or commerce apps. There's always seasonality to take into consideration. So many other things there. So the more you can dive into the data and isolate various components, I think the more effective your A/B testing process will be.
All right. Do you have anything else to add on those mistakes and pitfalls?
Yeah, a couple of other big things I just want to highlight here. So one thing, hypothesis generation, I think, is in itself an art and a science that is critical to the broader craft of A/B testing. So we can dive into this a little bit more later too, but be very careful about and be very thoughtful about generating a hypothesis that is clear and impactful and data driven, and that makes sense, right? A lot of times we hear from customers, well, we don't really know what to test, so we're not really sure how to generate a hypothesis, and that's okay. But as long as you're relying on your data and you understand, sort of back to what I was saying earlier, what is the product component you're trying to impact? How does that tie up to, or how does that contribute to your business impact? that will go a long way in helping you determine the if, the then, and then the because, those three critical components of your hypothesis. And so the last thing I'll say there, I think this is all sort of related, is a lot of customers we see who get started with A/B testing tend to test a little too broadly. And by that, I mean, a lot of times folks will come in and they'll want to test an entire new feature, entire new product. And I would say one of the core tenets of experimentation too is think big, but act small. And what that means is you want to be able to test on a granular level. And again, so back to that hypothesis formation and sort of like diving into the data, think about testing granular and impactful and really actionable items as opposed to large scale products and features, because then you introduce a lot of noise, right? Then it's very hard to parse out that causation and that correlation. And then that just sort of like, then you tend to trip yourself over. Then you can't test as quickly, as rapidly as you want to. So think big, think about the broader business and product metrics that you really want to be iterating on and driving toward, but then break that down into small, very digestible pieces so that you can start building out that machine of repetitive A/B testing so you can be constantly learning in real time. So yeah, those are some of the major pitfalls that I see for a lot of our customers as they get started.
Our next question is quite related to what you just said about the features and flagging and A/B testing. So can you please tell the audience a little bit more about that little overlap that there is with testing and feature management, and also what are the key differences and how those two should be managed?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I can, having spent several years at LaunchDarkly before Amplitude, I was very deeply embedded within the DevOps and the feature management space. There's definitely a lot of overlap here. In that Venn diagram of feature flagging and A/B testing, I think that overlap spectrum is quite big. But in practice, the approach is often, it can be pretty different depending on the teams that are taking this and sort of the reasoning behind it. So I'll start with feature flagging, which I think still sort of falls roughly within the realm of DevOps and release management, right? The goal here really is to release with safety and to release or deploy a new product with minimal impact. And you can do that with practices like testing in production, or a gradual release, or a ring deploy, or what some might call a canary deploy. So the goals here, again, are minimizing impact and really being able to control your new feature or new product as it gets released into the market. Now, on the flip side, A/B testing is, some might say, taking that a step further. And the goal now is more about learning. So the goal now is really trying to understand, the granular impact of a feature on your user behavior, and then taking those learnings and then continuing to optimize for growth. So once you move into that A/B testing realm, the goal here is, again, to sort of drive that growth cycle where you're constantly getting feedback and data about your user behavior in real time, and then looping that back to your engineering teams, your dev teams, your product teams, your growth teams, to continually build and improve on your product. So definitely very similar practices, very similar functionalities. And what I see in both, having in my time at LaunchDarkly, working more with engineers and developers who started out with feature flagging, eventually a lot of them want to move more into the A/B testing space. Similarly, now I'm on the other side at Amplitude, working with product managers and growth managers who are A/B testing. A lot of them want to move more into feature flagging so they can run both in tandem. And absolutely, I think the most effective companies and the most effective businesses I work with can do both and see the value of both. And one thing I'll say that I think is very powerful about this is, historically in A/B testing, sometimes A/B testing could cause silos between client-side teams and back-end teams. where developers weren't really sure what new elements were being introduced into the app, and a lot of times product managers or growth folks really wanted to sort of like subvert the dev process in order to iterate faster. Well, with sort of the practice of incorporating feature flagging into A/B testing, you now democratize that whole process, and you bring everyone together to help drive that continually iterative process without siloing anybody, without leaving anybody out, and without sort of keeping any guardrails up, unnecessary guardrails up.
Gotcha. So we've mentioned before a little bit about idea generation, and Alisa Jones and also our friends from the chat, Ashar Dama, they want to know a little bit more about where they can get new ideas for experimentation, and especially Alisa wants to know how to formulate a good hypothesis. So let's dive into that.
Yeah, that's the meat of it. Great question. So again, sort of one of the themes that we've talked about here is data, right? Do you have the data in place to really see? Themes that we've talked about here is. Oops, sorry about that. I think there was a little reverb there. So right, data is really critical to solid hypothesis formation. Are you looking into your data? Are you looking into your product analytics to really understand where the biggest either gaps or the most focus needs to go toward? And as you dive into your data, as you look into your product analytics, do you as an individual or do you as a team understand how those tie back to your broader business metrics and your business priorities? So I would say those are two of the most critical components to establishing a hypothesis, or at least building out a roadmap for experimentation and testing. When it comes to the art or the practice of A/B testing or hypothesis generating in itself, think about it in three components, right? Think about it in terms of what behavior you're trying to impact, how you're trying to impact it, and then do you have essentially a hypothesis or some sort of hunch as to why that behavior is being impacted. So think about it as like the if A, then B, because C. Those should be the three pillars of your hypothesis. Then as you run your experiment, totally prepare for each of those elements to be challenged and to potentially be disproved. If B does not happen, try to understand the why. If C is not the reason, try to understand the why behind it. So not only is using the data to generate the A, B, and C of your hypothesis important, but also critically important is, are you prepared then afterward to dive into the results to really understand the why behind whether or not your hypothesis was proven or disproven?
Just another question regarding that. That's my own question, actually, is how do you feel about quantifying a hypothesis, for example? I believe that by taking action A, but with the causality B, then we're going to have a lift of, I don't know, 20%. Do you think that teams should aim to quantifying this hypothesis before they get tested? And how should they go about it?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So I think I would say it depends. I think it depends largely on what it is that you're testing, what component of your app are you testing, and we can get a little bit too into the statistical methods behind it, right? Overall, I would say the more granular and more specific you can be, the better. But I also wouldn't say that it's an absolute necessity because a lot of times you just don't have the data or the historical data or the context to really understand what should be considered a success or a goal here. Now, if you are really lucky and you have a very robust, again, like analytics platform or data science team embedded, then maybe you'll be able to have some of those more historical insights to tell you, well, this is a goal that we should be trending toward that will then extrapolate up to these other product or business goals. So if you do have the luxury of having all those resources at your disposal, then I would say absolutely try to be as granular and prescriptive as possible with quantifying your results. But just because you don't have those at your disposal does not mean that you shouldn't continue to test and iterate, even if you do need to start a little bit with maybe a little bit more vagueness. That's okay, because as long as you're generating those that data and those insights, that will help get you to that point, or eventually you can be a little bit more specific, prescriptive, and quantitative about how you test.
Okay. So our next question is from Lucas Feynman. He says, we're hoping to start experimenting more often with our software products, and I was hoping to get some tips on how to validate and show the value of experimentation when you're just starting out. So how do you go about starting the process when we don't have an actually ongoing or resources or anything that is dedicated to experimentation in your company?
Yeah, that's again a very great question, and a big challenge that a lot of customers, especially smaller customers getting started, will run into. My first recommendation: use Amplitude. But also, if not, I think there are there are a lot of ways that you can get started with experimentation, even if you don't necessarily have a fully fledged A/B testing software or A/B testing mechanism in place. Whatever you can do to track insights, to be able to generate, to track data, generate insights, that is probably the most critical component of getting started. The value there is, once you've begun generating some insights, you can then show those insights to the rest of the team, whether it's engineering, whether it's product, whether it's development, and now you can start having a conversation around it, and you can start really generating that level of curiosity that is core to the foundation of successful A/B testing. So that's, as long as you start the conversation and you have the questions in place, I think that's how you can start building on that and building that hunger and that thirst for finding more insights and generating more data. And sometimes it can be something, building an A/B testing foundation can be as simple as traffic splitting, just understanding, like, if you were to release a new feature to a certain subset of your population, like, how will they respond to that? It doesn't need to be a very fancy or intricate type of machine where you're now doing like granular targeting, or you're doing cohort segmentation, all those types of things. Just start like testing on a certain subset of your population. Once you start getting results there to some extent, then you can start diving a little bit more, getting a little bit more intricate and more complicated into the data and parsing that out, and asking the right questions from there. But it's a process, right? And it's all about just getting started. You have to start somewhere. And with A/B testing, it's definitely it's kind of like riding a bike, like, it can be really scary to get started because there's this perception that you're often going to fall. The great thing about A/B testing is, even if you fall and scrape your knee, you're getting data out of that and you're learning about how to not do it next time, right? Exactly. So as long as you have somebody there to drive that momentum and to really ask the challenging questions, and you have the data in place to be able to prove or disprove, and use that as like an anchor point to generate interesting conversation, that is really how you start validating the value of experiment, when you don't really have a whole lot of other background or historical context to go off of.
Yeah, totally agree. And starting with smaller scale results and showing a little bit of the process and bringing some early wins definitely does go a long mile in helping, especially getting the buy-in from other departments and your C-levels.
Absolutely.
In the same line, so a little bit more about dependency on other areas and stuff like that. So what profiles do you think are a must to be a part of your squad or your team that is in charge of the tests? And that is, she asks this because she says it's sometimes really difficult to understand and to run tests with all the dependency from other areas. So who should be there for you?
Yeah, this is, again, a very common challenge I think a lot of organizations, especially larger organizations, run into. I would say there's not necessarily a must, right? There's not a single profile that I think is absolutely a necessity, but I think there are certain ideal states. Um, it's certainly when it comes to implementing software, right? The more buy-in that you can get from your engineering teams is always going to help you move things along faster. Having a data team that can, again, really dive down and parse out and explore the data, who can give you more actionable insights on your results, that will help move things along a lot faster and really help drive that conversation a lot faster. Having a product manager who can tie in those technical insights and those technical metrics to those business insights and really understand the customer perspective, that will all be really critical. Having a designer, having someone on the growth side who can all sort of like drive these conversations and really challenge assumptions, hypotheses from their various perspectives. I think those will all, having a very sort of like broad and fleshed out team like that, will all go to driving like a very successful experimentation squad or an experimentation team. But you're absolutely right. It is difficult sometimes to navigate across all of these various organizations, and it can be very challenging sometimes to try and negotiate for time or resources from across these other orgs. And this sort of goes to the previous question, which is, how do you validate this, right? A lot of customers I've seen and work with have sort of crossed that chasm where they initially, there was a lot of friction and sluggishness with getting their A/B testing up and running because there just wasn't that level of buy-in from across the team. And I think the most successful organizations overcome that by being vulnerable and being open and being very humble to the idea of democratizing insights and data. So, if you're a new company and you're just getting started, regardless of what your role is, whether you're on the infrastructure team or the security team or growth or product or data, be very humble and vulnerable and very open to sharing what insights you are seeing across the entire organization. Because I guarantee you, people always have an opinion about data, and if the data impacts what they're working on. And also back to my point about thinking big but acting small. Once you sort of like tie out, or once you sort of like demonstrate how much this granular data really impacts the business as a whole and the organization as a whole, you then start to put some accountability on other teams as well, right? So that's when the conversation really gets started. That's when teams become really interested in their input and having their function contribute to A/B testing. So again, I think the point there is there's not necessarily a must with any successful team, but ideally, if you can get buy-in from across the entire organization by demonstrating and democratizing access to the data and the results, the much more effective and the much more robust your testing and product optimization process will be.
That's right. So when you have people getting access to ideation, to data, and to being able to submit, for example, an idea or a hypothesis, that obviously comes with a little part of education, internal education. That's what our next question is about. So Abhishek wants to know, how do you educate about the process internally?
Yeah, I think this really depends largely on your organization and how big it is, how easy it is to navigate. In my experience, I think we are at this age now where all companies, regardless of how mature they are in that sort of like digital maturity model, everybody is so data obsessed, right? Like that's all we talk about now, not just in Silicon Valley, not just in the startup space, but really every organization wants to know and wants to learn. I think if you are someone who has taken it upon yourself to evangelize A/B testing across your organization, I think it's on you sort of to understand what is it that each of the what types of data, what data does each organization want? If you're trying to negotiate buy-in from the engineering or the dev team, right? Understand what their metrics are. What part of the product do they care most about? And do you have the data that you can demonstrate to them and show them why A/B testing can really help impact this metric or this data point? Once similar to the data science team, similar to the business intelligence teams, product teams, client side teams, design teams, show them that you have access to the data that they really want to know more about, and show them that the data that you're generating, the insights that you're generating through your practice of A/B testing, can really help give them more access to the requisite data that they need to make their jobs easier and make their lives better. Once you're able to demonstrate that, what I found is then the conversation becomes incredibly lively. Again, everybody has this obsession and this hunger for data, and B, almost everybody has an opinion about that data. So if you can leverage that to build momentum, to start that conversation around A/B testing, you're going to find that it becomes really easy to then get that buy-in from these various teams and demonstrate or sort of like educate and evangelize the process and the practice. And eventually what you can do, then is once you have a more robust practice going, then you can even move upward, right? Then you can work to get buy-in from, the executive level team, the C-suite, and you can show, based on this process that we've built, based on this machine that we've built, here are some insights that we've generated, and look at how, the efforts that we've put in from an engineering team or a business team are really impacting our organization as a whole. And that in itself then becomes this snowball effect where you'll start getting a lot more investment and buy-in from teams all across the organization and up and down that hierarchy to really help build momentum and drive you towards success.
Wonderful. So our next question is about, let me just find that one. It's also from Abhishek, and it is, do you optimize to increase the success rates of experiments, or simply focus on the output testing more? So how do you find that balance? Is getting more tests to work or testing more?
Yeah, and that is the constant sort of balancing act that everybody who works in experimentation has to focus on, or has to navigate, right? I would say that it depends on a couple of things. I would say it depends on maybe where you as an organization or as a company are in your experimentation journey. What level of maturity would you say you're at? What amount of resources do you have at your disposal for running A/B tests? And really, what is your goal for A/B testing? For me personally, a lot of the customers that I work with, I think just running more tests is always going to be, more a more robust practice. And the reason there is, not every experiment you run is going to generate significant insights or yield significant results. But that doesn't necessarily mean that experiment is not successful. But the more you run, the more rapidly you can generate these insights, and the more rapidly you can sort of iterate and optimize your product in real time. However, there's certainly a lot of constraints, real world constraints here, right? In order to reach statistical significance for experiments, that largely depends on your end user base. What volume of active users do you have? If you are, a Facebook or a Spotify, you probably have millions and millions of users to where you can be running hundreds, if not thousands, of concurrent experiments in a short period of time and generate really significant results and continue to iterate on that. most of us who work in software, most businesses in general, don't have that level of resource. So focus more at first on just sort of like riding that bike, like learning how to pedal correctly. Run a few experiments that are generating results and that are successful, and that so that you can understand what success means for experimentation within your business, and then focus on that momentum. The downside of that, however, is what I see with some customers is they might run a handful, one or two experiments, and they don't see results. They don't understand really what the results are telling them, and so then they stop. And that, I would say, is probably the thing that you want to avoid is sort of losing that momentum just because you're not running as many experiments, or because some of the experiments you've run aren't really validating the hypotheses that you had hoped. So it is a little bit of both. It really does depend on where you are as an organization, what you're hoping to get out of experimentation. But the important thing is to keep on testing, keep on generating, drive that curiosity, and don't stop testing.
My only 2 cents about that is, for example, when you're starting out experimentation and you're just starting to grow your business and you have little resources, just go for the experiments with the highest impact. If you have little resources, experiment on things that are going to matter. Like the color of the button can have an impact, but if it's really not that impactful, you should prioritize testing things that have a bigger impact. That's just my 2 cents on those. I'm
Yeah.
sure you're.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to elaborate on that a little bit more too. I think prioritization is definitely important, right? And the prioritization is, I think the big challenge that anybody faces, and there's no good formula for it necessarily. But again, if you have the right data in place and you have at least buy-in from the right people, you can have the conversations around what needs, what are our business metrics, what are our business priorities, and what components of our product really contribute to or impact those priorities the most. And that's how I would say most successful teams are able to identify the prioritization around what to test first and what could potentially make the most impact.
Wonderful. And how about onboarding folks when they're just starting their experimentation process? How do you get them to start running tests quickly? And what is the most critical part that onboarding gives customers to get them that quick win fast enough so that they keep on testing?
Yeah. So again, a great segue. I think it had a lot to do with prioritization. I think the key way to get customers to onboard to experiment quickly is education. I think is ensuring that they understand the why and the what of testing. I think what sort of going back to one of the earlier questions in terms of one of the pitfalls is a lot of times, especially within larger organizations, the concept of A/B testing or the concept of experimentation is generally understood, or at the very least, like broadly understood by folks at the executive level. A/B testing has become such like a hot topic that everybody knows that they need to test. And so you bring in this software, you start implementing this practice. But then if you go a layer down, not everybody really understands the why of their testing. A lot of customers might just say, oh, we're testing because like we need to, or we were told to. And that's a great opportunity as a product partner to come in and sort of then drive that conversation, that education around, let's figure it out then. Like, let's go through and try to understand what you're actually trying to optimize for. What are your goals as a business? And what are your goals as a product? What are your priorities as a business? And what are your priorities as a product? Once you help customers understand those facets and those priorities, I think that really establishes that sort of like conceptual foundation for getting customers to run experiments. Then comes the actual the execution and the operational part, right? Then comes designing experiments that actually effectively target those business and technical priorities so that they can see these wins that really impact their product at a high level. Once you sort of like get that positive reinforcement loop in place and you start getting the critical results and the critical data, then you'll see that momentum starts building and you cross that chasm, and that momentum, that volume becomes more exponential.
Beautiful. And Jessica here, she wants to know about any tips for people who want to know a little bit more on how to start a career in experimentation, and how do you get started with that if you're, for example, in product or in marketing or in any other areas that correlate.
Right. Well, I think the great thing is right now, again, since we are in this age of data and everybody is so data driven and data obsessed, there's really, I mean, truly, there's no way you can avoid a career in that's somehow experimentation adjacent. So I would say there's a couple of different ways of going about it. One is the path that I went down, which is to work within a product analytics or experimentation business. So I got my start within the digital optimization or product development space by working in customer success at a company called Apptimize, which was a mobile-first A/B testing solution that was acquired by Airship several years ago. And that was an incredibly amazing experience that allowed me to really, it really was a crash course in product management, in product optimization, in data science, in development, and in A/B testing. And this was several years ago. This was 5 or 6 years ago now, I think, where A/B testing was really just getting started in the space. It's been incredible now, having spent some time within a growth company like mParticle, within a feature flagging company like LaunchDarkly, to see the way that A/B testing has evolved across the entire business world. And what that means for people who are trying to get a career started in experimentation, it really means there's no wrong way to do it. If you're working with a consumer app, whether you're in product, whether you're in engineering, whether you're in marketing, there are so many tools and resources at your disposal to test things. And even if you don't, again, even if you don't have a full like machine set up, that doesn't mean you can't test in some way. So my advice to you in that case is just go and do it. Start testing something. Find something about the specific pillar or the function that you're focused on, and find some way to iterate on that and to generate some ideas or some results based off of those tests, and then start evangelizing that and start driving that conversation across the organization. That will really help drive the momentum for you and will really help establish you as, if not an industry expert in experiment, at the very least, sort of a team or a company expert in experimentation.
Beautiful. There are actually plenty of resources to understand how to formulate an idea, what is a hypothesis, and a little bit of the basics on statistical models and tools out there. So it is not that great of a barrier for you to get a basic understanding. And then as you are bringing more of an action of it into your day-to-day life, more questions are going to pop up, and it's there's a lot of resources to learn more about that. There's a question. So, and everything is evolving so quickly. So even when you think that you know we already know everything, there's always more and more to learn. So there's a question that actually is related to that. So this one is about map testing, and it's a question about how do you see machine learning and AI entering the A/B testing space, and your take on map testing? That's when you don't have like that regular A/B test that you decide on a date when you're going to analyze the result, and then you're going to just go with the variation that you've determined in a statistical significant test, that this one is the best. This one already uses machine learning and already directs the traffic to the one that is the winner. So it's a little bit different. It's not how you usually traditionally do the A/B testing. So what's your take on that and your considerations about this new technologies going into A/B testing?
Yeah, certainly a great question. And it's been really interesting to see, I think, the way multi-arm bandit testing has sort of, the position on multi-arm bandit testing has shifted across the years. I remember when I first got started at Apptimize, again, however many years ago, I think it was multi-arm bandit testing was viewed with a lot of skepticism. And I think that's because of all the variables that can impact multi-arm bandit testing. As Jordana mentioned, right, with multi-arm bandit testing, you're sort of doing a lot of reshuffling of your users as into different variations, as variations show varying levels of lift, of significance, of improvement, et cetera. Which is definitely very powerful and definitely very valuable, especially if you are, a commerce or retail app. However, there are, I would say, a number of pitfalls there. I think the first consideration to take is, what statistical method are you using to run your A/B test? Are you doing sequential testing? Are you doing t-testing? In these types of statistical methods, there are various considerations with how often you should be peeking at your results and taking actions on your results. Now, I am by no means a statistical expert or a math expert, but I think these are some of the underlying considerations that are very critical, because without using the right statistical method, you could really be sort of ignoring some of the other variables that can affect multi-arm bandit testing, such as seasonality, right? So an example here, and this was a pitfall a lot of our customers ran into at Apptimize, was you launch an experiment, and because sometimes users typically react to new features or new elements in a certain way, either positively or negatively, the immediate result will show a pretty significant lift or the inverse of that. And the multi-arm bandit machine will then start reallocating users into another variation. But that doesn't necessarily mean long-term that's going to, that is the actual more performant variant. So these are types of like the seasonality pitfalls you want to avoid. Overall, what I'll say is, with multi-arm bandit testing and AI entering the A/B testing space, I think that is an amazing tool that can really help very mature teams run more sophisticated and more complex experiments. But if you think about it, like as a let's say as a sports car, as a race car, not everybody is meant to drive a Ferrari. Not everybody is meant to drive a Lamborghini, at least not yet. So get started first and get a solid foundation on the fundamentals of A/B testing before getting into the more sort of like complex and potentially complicated world of multi-arm bandit testing and AI.
That's right. So one of the takes here that I have on map testing is the use cases. So if you want, you have like a limited time to get a significant test result, go for a map test. If your objective is to optimize for conversions, for example. But then again, if you want to have a statistically significant test, then definitely go for the regular one. It just depends on what are your goals and what you're trying to do, right?
Exactly.
And here's a question here about whether or not you have some cases or some stories from the past that you can remember about experiments that have worked or have not worked, so people can understand a little bit more tangibilize what is possible and what is the scope or what is possible to do with experimentation.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the beauty of experimentation, really, there's no limit to what you can test. In my experience working with customers building out an experimentation platform, it's truly surprising what you'll see that will make a significant impact for your end users. I recall working with a large fitness app where they were trying to make an impact on the registration flow. Their goal was to increase their amount of authenticated or registered users, and they weren't really sure why there seemed to be such a big drop off within a certain point in their funnel. And they tested a lot of different things. They tested, the simple CTAs and like button size and button placements, all the way up to like the number of steps within the flow. And it was really surprising for them. What they saw that was most massively impactful was the positioning of a specific button within the page. So for like moving a button from the left hand of the page to the right hand of the page, in this specific instance, actually ended up being very significant for them. Now, the reasoning behind that, there's a lot of different, there's a lot of data you can dive into to try to figure out the why behind it. But that's where they saw the most significant lift. Now, I bring this story up not to say necessarily that this is what you should be doing, although it certainly is a component of testing you can do. But I bring this up to say that you never know what is going to work and what isn't going to work, which is why you should experiment on it. I've also worked with a lot of customers who have designed these like very intricate sort of like infrastructure, like performance-based experiments that really generated fairly insignificant results, even though there was so much effort put in and expectations were so high around this. So test frequently, test often, test every little bit of your app that you can, and try your best to understand your end user. I think as here at Amplitude, we dogfood our own product. Hopefully you as a product owner or as an engineer, as a designer, you also dogfood your app, and try to get yourself in the mind of your user, and try to understand like how your end users might feel or interact with certain elements of your app. And that's a great way to figure out what to test on, and how to drive significant results through A/B testing.
Harvey, there's a couple more questions still that were sent here on chat. There's one question from Alberto. He's asking about how can Amplitude determine causality instead of correlation? Is it possible to be done?
That is a very great question, and unfortunately, I am not the data expert here to be able to speak to that with any certainty. But I think that it can be done. I think that if you dive into the data, dive into the analytics, I think you can get very close. I don't know that you can necessarily always say these two are intrinsically tied, but I don't think it necessarily matters either, right? I think what's really important is as long as you see that there is some sort of correlation in like very close correlation within two metrics, I think that is close enough for you as a decision maker or as a technical owner to make a decision based on that.
Beautiful. And there's another question here. It's from Max Plonichik. His question is testing server side versus client side, which is better and in which situation?
Yeah, I don't necessarily think that there is a better one. I think it depends on really what you're trying to accomplish. This sort of goes back to the conversation around feature flagging versus A/B testing. My position on this is you should do both. Both obviously are very impactful, have major impacts to your application, right? Server-side tests can often, they impact things like app performance and app behavior, whereas client-side apps are impacting more sort of like front-end elements. Both, I would imagine, are very critical to your success as a technical product, but also as a business. But it also, again, depends on really what your goals are or where your biggest gaps are. Maybe if your app is very buggy, or maybe you don't have the most successful releases, then focus more on server-side testing first before you move on to client-side testing. But again, your server-side component of your app is just as important as the client-side component. So you should be constantly iterating, building on, and improving on both.
Beautiful. Harvey, I think our time is up. I'd like to thank you so much for participating on our AMA today. I think it brought some really valuable insights for everyone who was watching us today. And I'd like to invite you guys for our upcoming events at Growth Hackers Community. There's going to be a chat on March 24th with Taylor Ryan. He's going to be talking to us a little bit about how to analyze your competition through SEO. And also, I'd like to invite you all to participate on the State of Growth research. We're doing a benchmark research on companies that are working with experimentation. We want to learn a little bit more about everything that we've just talked here. So how do you go about formulating a hypothesis? What people are involved? How do you call your team? Who owns objectives? And we're going to create a nice benchmark for everyone in our industry to learn with our peers. For everyone who participates on the State of Growth, by the end of the survey, you're going to get a 20% discount in any course at our Growth Hackers University, where there are plenty of resources to learn more about growth and experimentation, marketing, and product. And you also have a chance to win free certification every week during the month of March. So go ahead and start entering our State of Growth. Harvey, thank you so much. If you have any final considerations, please let us know.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you so much, Jordana, and thank you so much to everybody here. If you have any more questions, feel free to reach out to me directly. I'm just harvey@amplitude.com. And to the person who asked about careers in experimentation, Amplitude is growing quickly. We're hiring like crazy. Take a look at the careers page and feel free to reach out if there's anything that looks interesting to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Harvey.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Bye now.